Where are you watching this from? Drop your city below. It helps to know we're not as alone as we feel, even when the person hurting us is the one we raised. My name is Eleanor. I'm 68 years old, and for 31 years I ran the front office of a dental practice in Asheville, North Carolina, scheduling, billing, calming down nervous 8-year-olds before their first fillings. I was good at my job because I paid attention to details. People's tells. The things they didn't say out loud but showed you anyway, in the way they held their shoulders or avoided your eyes. I wish I'd used that skill on my own family sooner. This is the story of how I learned that love, when it's real, doesn't need an invoice. And how long it can take a mother to admit that her own child has started treating her like a line item. Ray. My son Nathan was born when I was 36, after 2 miscarriages I never talked about with anyone but my late husband, Ray. We'd almost given up. I remember the nurse placing him on my chest and Ray standing there in his work boots. He'd come straight from a delivery route, hadn't even had time to change, crying in a way I'd never seen a grown man cry before, not even at his own father's funeral. Ray drove trucks for a regional grocery distributor for 26 years. 6 a.m. shifts, sometimes doubles during the holidays. I taught myself to do the books for a small dental practice downtown, starting as a receptionist and working my way up until I was running the front office, insurance claims, scheduling, payroll for 6 employees. We weren't rich, but we were steady. A paid-off house on Sycamore Street with a garden out back where Ray grew tomatoes that never quite tasted as good as he claimed they did. Enough left over for Nathan's braces, his baseball cleats, a used Honda when he turned 16 that Ray and I bought with cash we'd saved for 2 years in an envelope taped to the back of a dresser drawer.
We weren't the kind of people who talked about money at the dinner table, but we were the kind of people who thought about it constantly, quietly, so our son never had to. Ray died of a stroke when Nathan was 22, 3 months after his college graduation from NC State. He'd been fine that morning, complained his coffee tasted off, joked about it, went out to mow the lawn. By the time I found him in the grass, it was already too late. I remember thinking at the funeral that at least Nathan had gotten to walk across that stage with his father in the audience, whooping louder than anyone else in the row. Small mercies. You learn to collect them like that after a certain age. You learn that grief doesn't ask permission and neither does gratitude. And sometimes you have to hold both at once. Nathan handled the funeral better than I expected. Or maybe he just handled it privately the way his father used to. He gave the eulogy. For about a year afterward he called me every single Sunday just to talk about nothing much. I clung to those calls harder than I let on. The wedding. Nathan moved to Charlotte for a job in commercial real estate a year after graduating. Back when the market there was still climbing and every young man in a decent suit seemed to be doing well. He met Priya at a work conference. She was in finance, sharp, funny in a dry way I liked immediately, ambitious in the way I'd always secretly hoped Nathan would be, since he'd inherited more of his father's contentment than his mother's drive. They married 2 years later at a vineyard outside Charlotte. I gave them $18,000 toward the down payment on their first house. Money I'd been quietly saving for years for a kitchen renovation I never got around to. The countertops were from 1987. I didn't care. You give your children a foundation, and you trust they'll build something worth having on it. At the reception, Nathan found me near the dessert table and put his arm around my shoulders the way Ray used to. "Mom, you didn't have to do that," he said, meaning the money. "I know," I told him. "But you're my son. I want you to start out ahead, not behind, the way your father and I did." Nathan called every Sunday, same as before. He and Priya drove down to Asheville for Thanksgiving and Christmas, alternating years with her family in Raleigh. When Ren was born, I flew up to Charlotte the next morning and held that impossibly small girl and cried in a hospital bathroom afterward, overwhelmed at how much love a person's chest can hold. 2 years later came Miles and I did the same thing all over again. I flew up for birthdays. I babysat for a full week when Ren was 3 so Nathan and Priya could take a trip to the coast alone. For the first time since the wedding. I loved being useful to them. I loved, more than that, simply being near them. The slow fade. I don't know exactly when it started to change, which is, I think, the cruelest part of it. There was no single conversation, no fight, no moment I could point to later and say that's when I should have noticed. It was more like watching a photograph fade in sunlight, so gradual you only see it's gone once you compare it to how vivid it used to be. Nathan got promoted to a senior position at his firm. Priya went back to work full-time after Miles started preschool. The Sunday calls, which had been sacred for almost a decade, became once-a-month calls. The once-a-month calls became texts. The text became a thumbs-up emoji on whatever I'd sent. A photo of the garden. A funny thing that had happened at the grocery store, a memory of Ray. I told myself this was ordinary. Children grow up and outward, it's supposed to happen. I'd done something similar to my own mother in my 30s, swept up in the urgency of my own small, loud life, and she'd never once made me feel guilty for it. So I didn't push. I sent birthday cards with $20 bills folded inside for Ren and Miles. I asked in every text about soccer practice and violin lessons and whatever new thing Miles was refusing to eat that week. I waited the way you wait for weather to change, believing if you're patient enough it will. My visits, which used to be week-long, became long weekends, and then became single overnight stays, and then became day trips where I'd drive the 4 hours up, have a 2-hour lunch, and drive the 4 hours back so as not to be any trouble. I always stayed in a hotel near their neighborhood, even when they had a guest room, because some instinct in me, some old careful instinct from a childhood where you didn't overstay your welcome anywhere, told me not to ask for more than what was freely given. "Mom, you're going to spoil them," Priya said once, laughing, when I showed up with an entire duffel bag of gifts for no occasion at all. "That's what grandmothers do," I said. And I meant it. I still mean it. But there was a Christmas 4 years ago now when I suggested coming up for the holiday, and Nathan's response came through as a text, not a call. "Actually, we're doing Priya's parents' place in Raleigh this year. They've got more room and it's easier with the kids' schedules. We'll do a big visit in the spring, promise." I spent that Christmas alone in the house on Sycamore Street, and told myself it was only fair. Priya's parents deserved time too, and it wasn't a competition, and I wasn't going to be the mother-in-law who kept score. The spring visit never quite materialized. The next Christmas the same text arrived nearly word for word. And the one after that, the ask. 3 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Nathan called, which was unusual enough on its own that I sat down at the kitchen table before I even answered, the way you brace yourself before opening a letter from the IRS. "Mom, I want to talk to you about something," he said. "Nothing urgent. Just planning ahead." He told me his firm had gone through a round of layoffs that spring. He hadn't been affected, he assured me quickly, almost too quickly, but it had rattled him. He'd started reading about eldercare, about probate, about how messy and expensive things get for families when a parent ages without the right paperwork in place. He didn't want that for us. "Wouldn't it be easier," he said, "if he were added to my checking account just as a safety net, just so he could step in and manage things if I ever couldn't do it myself?" I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. He was my son. Of course. A few weeks later he mentioned, almost as an afterthought during another call, that his bank offered a high-yield savings account. Much better interest than my little credit union downtown. Wouldn't it make more sense, he suggested, to move some of my savings over there? With both our names on it so he could help me keep an eye on it, make sure I wasn't losing money to inflation sitting in an account earning nothing. I moved $52,000 into that account, nearly everything left over from Ray's pension buyout, money I'd protected and barely touched for over a decade, the closest thing I had to a monument to how carefully we'd lived. "Thanks, Mom," Nathan said. "Seriously, this takes a weight off both our minds." It felt good, if I'm honest. It felt like I was still providing for my child, the way I had when he was small and I was cutting coupons and packing his lunches. Still useful. Still needed. The small withdrawals. Over the next 2 years, I'd occasionally notice money moving out of the joint savings account, $1,000 here, $1,500 there, small enough that each one on its own seemed reasonable to overlook. When I asked Nathan about it, he always had an answer ready, delivered lightly, like it barely needed saying at all. Ren's orthodontist. Miles's reading tutor. A leak in the roof after a spring storm. These old houses are constant maintenance, Mom. You know that better than anyone. I never asked to see a receipt. That's not how I was raised to treat family. Looking back now, I can see the pattern the way you can only see a maze once you're standing above it. But at the time, each explanation arrived wrapped in enough of the old warmth in his voice that I swallowed it whole and went back to my garden, my church group, my quiet evenings. The fall. This past spring, I slipped on a wet patch of kitchen floor and cracked 2 ribs. Nothing that required a hospital admission, thank God, but enough that the ear doctor sent me home with instructions to take it slow for 6 weeks. No lifting, no reaching, someone nearby who could help with groceries in the higher shelves. I called Nathan from the plastic chair in the ER waiting room, still in my nightgown under my coat, humiliated in the particular way you only feel humiliated at 68, waiting on your own child to answer the phone. It rang 4 times. I could hear noise behind him when he finally picked up. Silverware, laughter, a restaurant hum. Mom, hey. I'm actually at Miles's team dinner right now. Everything okay? I told him about the fall, keeping my voice light, the way you do when you don't want to be a burden even in the moment when you most need not to be one. Oh my God, Mom, that's scary. Are you okay? Do you need me to hang on? And then muffled to someone beside him. Sorry, wanna see my mom just... Okay, sorry, Mom, what were you saying? I told him again. He said all the right words. That's scary, I'm so glad you're okay. Let me know if you need anything at all. And then he was gone again, folded back into the noise of the restaurant, and I sat alone in that waiting room with 2 cracked ribs and a strange, hollow feeling I didn't have a name for yet. Nobody came. Not that week. Not the next. A neighbor, Carol, brought me a casserole and helped me reach the top shelf in my pantry. My church friend Diane drove me to 2 follow-up appointments. My own son, 4 hours away, sent a text that read, "How are the ribs? Thinking of you," with a heart emoji and nothing more. 3 weeks after the fall, still moving carefully, still wincing when I laughed too hard at something on television, I called Nathan and asked, as gently as I knew how, if he might have time to visit. It had been 14 months since I'd seen him or the children in person. The pause on the line lasted a beat too long. Mom, you know how it is right now. Ren's got travel soccer basically every weekend through the summer. Miles just started at a new school and he's still adjusting. We don't want to disrupt that. Priya's swamped at work. It's really hard to get away right now. I could come to you, I offered. I'm feeling much better. The guest room's kind of become Miles's playroom, he said. And honestly, Mom, with your ribs still healing, our stairs would be brutal. We've got that steep staircase, remember? Something in me went very quiet and very clear in that moment. The way a room goes still right before a storm breaks, the air pressure dropping in a way your body registers before your mind catches up. Nathan, I said. I miss you. I miss the kids. I feel like I've become someone you check in on instead of someone you actually visit. Don't do this, Mom. His voice took on an edge I'd been hearing more and more over the past year. A kind of clipped impatience I didn't recognize from the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on long car rides. You're making it sound like we don't care about you. We have a lot going on right now. You can't expect us to just drop everything because you're feeling lonely. Lonely. He said it like it was a character flaw. Like it was something I'd chosen, the way you might choose to leave dishes in the sink. I didn't argue with him. I felt too tired suddenly in a way that went past the ribs, past my body entirely. I told him we'd talk soon. I hung up. And I sat in my recliner for a long time with the television off, listening to the refrigerator hum in the next room, before I finally opened my laptop and logged into that joint savings account for the first time in longer than I want to admit. What the numbers said. I want to be honest about something. I am not a woman who likes confrontation, and for most of my life I have preferred not to look too closely at things that might upset the peace I've worked hard to keep. That is precisely why it took me this long. Not because I hadn't noticed the withdrawals, because I hadn't let myself add them up. That night I did. Over roughly 2 years. $34,000 withdrawn from the joint savings account. Orthodontist visits, a reading tutor, roof repairs, a car repair. That, when I checked the date against an old Facebook post Priya had shared, lined up almost exactly with a week Nathan and Priya had spent in Charleston celebrating their 10th anniversary. A trip I remember because Priya had posted a photo of them on a rooftop bar, both of them tanned and laughing, a bottle of champagne sweating on the table between them. I checked the joint checking account next, the one with the direct deposit for my teacher's pension flowing into it every month. Smaller withdrawals there, $150, $300, sometimes twice in the same week, steady as a slow leak going back further than I'd realized, almost to the very month Nathan had first suggested adding his name. I sat at that kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning with a legal pad and a calculator, the same kind of legal pad I used to use. Balancing the books at the dental office, writing down every figure I could find and reconstructing, as best I could, where 30+ years of careful saving had actually gone. The number, when I finally added it all together, was just over $34,000 from savings and roughly $8,000 more from checking. $42,000. More than Ray and I had spent, combined, on every car we ever owned in our married life. I thought about Nathan's house in the good part of Charlotte, the one with the wraparound porch he'd sent me pictures of when they bought it. I thought about the Range Rover in the driveway in every photo, and Priya's new handbag in a Facebook picture from a work event, and the ski trip to Colorado over New Year's that Ren had posted about on the family group chat, complete with photos of them all in matching plaid pajamas by a fireplace that wasn't theirs. I thought about myself in my small ranch house on Sycamore Street, carefully clipping coupons for a grocery budget I didn't strictly need to keep, wearing a winter coat I'd had since before Ray died, because some old habit in me still equated frugality with virtue, still believed that saving was a kind of love you performed quietly, on behalf of people who would need it someday. They weren't struggling. They had never been struggling. They had simply found in me a source of money that asked no questions and required no explanation beyond whatever gentle story was offered at the time. I didn't make my decision that night out of anger, though anger was certainly in the room with me, sitting at that table like an uninvited guest. I made it slowly, over the following days, in something closer to clarity, the particular cold clarity that comes after you've cried every tear you have available to you and there's simply nothing left to do but think. The attorney. The next morning, still sore in my ribs and sore somewhere else entirely, I called an attorney. Not Bill Harmon, the family friend who'd handled Ray's estate and who golfed with Nathan's father-in-law twice a year, but a woman 2 counties over named Deborah Osei, whom I found through a referral from my church's elder support group, someone with no connection to my son or his wife whatsoever. I explained everything. The joint accounts, the withdrawals, the pattern of excuses, the 14 months since I'd seen my grandchildren. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, I'd married Ray's name and kept it. You have every legal right to remove someone from your accounts, or to close the accounts entirely and open new ones solely in your name. These are your assets. Joint holder status doesn't change legal ownership of what you originally contributed. You can revoke that access at any time, and you don't need his consent or even his advance notice to do it. What about the money he's already taken? She was quiet for a moment, a professional quiet, not an unkind one. That's more complicated. With a joint account, he had legitimate legal access to those funds, regardless of whether the withdrawals were, in a moral sense, appropriate. You could pursue a civil claim, argue financial exploitation of an elder, but it would be an uphill fight if he can show he believed he had your ongoing permission. It would also mean functionally suing your son. I want you to think hard about whether that's a road you actually want to go down, or whether protecting what's left and moving forward is the better use of your energy. Protect what's left, I repeated. That's my advice, yes. Close the joint accounts. Open new ones in your name only, at a different bank than the one he's familiar with. Secure your other assets. And let's talk about your will, because from what you've described, it may not reflect what you actually want anymore. I made an appointment to come back the following week with all my account information and a copy of my current will, the one that left everything, without condition, to Nathan. That same afternoon I called a financial advisor as well. Someone new, someone Nathan had never met and wouldn't think to call. Her name was Renata. Brisk in a way I found comforting rather than cold. I need to move my money into accounts solely in my name, I told her. All of it. Soon. Absolutely, Mrs. Whitfield, she said, without asking why, which I appreciated more than I can say. The Tuesday. The day I decided to act on all of it was, fittingly, a Tuesday, the day I'd always gone to the grocery store, ever since Ray and I were newlyweds, and Tuesday was when the store restocked its produce. I kept to my routine that morning. Coffee. The crossword. A short walk around the block, slower than it used to be, on account of the ribs. I wanted the day to feel ordinary, deliberate, calm. Not like a woman unraveling, but like a woman finally, quietly putting herself back together. I dressed carefully for the bank. My good slacks. A cream blouse I'd bought for a dental conference years ago, and rarely had occasion to wear. Ray's mother's pearl earrings, the ones he'd given me on our 20th anniversary, along with a card that just said still the best thing that ever happened to me. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. A serious woman making a serious decision, not some confused elderly widow who could be talked out of it or dismissed with a sympathetic smile. The bank manager, a kind-faced man named Mr. Alvarez who'd helped me open my very first CD 20 years earlier, greeted me warmly when I walked in. "Mrs. Whitfield, good morning. What can we do for you today?" "I need to close my joint accounts and open new ones in my name only," I said. He blinked just slightly. "Your joint accounts with your son, Nathan?" "Yes. Can I ask what's prompting the change?" I met his eyes and kept my voice steady. The same voice I used to use calming down nervous patients in the dental office waiting room. "Because they're my accounts, and I no longer wish to have a joint holder on them." To his credit, he didn't push further. "Of course. Let's get the paperwork started." Took just over 2 hours. We closed the joint checking account that had received my pension deposit every month for the past 3 years. We closed the joint savings account that had once held $52,000 and now held just over $18,000. The $34,000 in withdrawals confirmed in black and white on the printed statement Mr. Alvarez handed across the desk to me, each transaction time-stamped, some of them clustered suspiciously around holidays and school breaks. I transferred everything into brand new accounts. New account numbers. New checks still warm from the printer. A new debit card that would arrive in the mail within a week. "Mrs. Whitfield," Mr. Alvarez said gently near the end, "your son will receive a notification that these joint accounts have been closed. I just want you to be prepared for that." "I understand," I said. "And he won't have access to the new ones." "That's correct." "Good," I said. "That's exactly the point." I also drove across town that same afternoon to close a small emergency fund I'd kept at a second bank, one Nathan had helped me open years ago for convenience, with his name attached almost as an afterthought at the time. By 4 o'clock that day, every dollar I owned was sitting somewhere with only my name on it. The will. That evening, still in my good blouse, still wearing the pearl earrings because I hadn't had the heart to take them off yet, I sat down at my kitchen table and did the other thing I'd been putting off for years, if I'm honest with myself, long before any of this started. I rewrote my will. The old one was simple, generous, and thoughtless in the particular way generosity can be thoughtless when you assume good faith will always be returned in kind. Everything, the house, the remaining savings, Ray's life insurance that had never been touched, a small stock portfolio I'd built slowly over 3 decades. All of it, unconditionally, to Nathan. The new one looked different. I set up an education trust for Ren and Miles. Money that bypasses their parents entirely and funnels directly into a 529 education plan, controlled by a trustee, not by Nathan or Priya, until each child turns 18. Money no one can quietly withdraw a little of at a time for a reason that sounds almost true. I left a specific sum for Nathan, not nothing, because he is still my son and some part of me, the part that still remembers him at 6 years old bringing me dandelions from the yard as if they were roses, could not bring myself to leave him with nothing. But a small fraction of what he would have received before. I designated 3 local charities I'd supported quietly for years: a women's shelter, the public library's literacy program, the food bank on Tunnel Road. And the largest remaining share, the bulk of what Ray and I had built together over 30 years of careful, unglamorous living, I directed toward a scholarship fund in Ray's name at the community college nearby, for kids working their way through school without a safety net, the way Ray himself had wished, more than once over the years, that he'd had the chance to do before circumstances pushed him straight into a delivery truck instead of a classroom. If Nathan didn't value what we'd built as a family, if I had become, in practical terms, little more than an account he could access when convenient, then I would make sure the money went somewhere that would actually be grateful for it. The call. Nathan called 4 days after the accounts closed. I didn't need to see the caller ID to know it was him. I could feel it in my chest before the phone even finished its first ring. The particular dread of a conversation you've been expecting and dreading in equal measure. "Mom." His voice was sharp, tight, stripped of every ounce of the warmth I'd grown so used to filling in for myself over the years. "What the hell did you do?" I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup I didn't especially want but needed something to do with my hands. I kept stirring. "I closed our joint accounts," I said. "I assume the bank notified you." "You closed them?" Without even telling me? Without discussing it with me first? Nathan, I said, and I want to tell you my voice came out steady because it did, more steady than I expected it to. They were my accounts. I don't need your permission to manage my own finances. That's not, Mom, we had an arrangement. We did, I agreed. And in that arrangement over 2 years more than $40,000 left those accounts for things I never once questioned because I trusted you. I've since looked at exactly where that money went. I know about Charleston. I know the roof repair happened 3 weeks after your actual roofer's invoice, which I found, by the way, still in a box of old mail you asked me to hold on to. I know you and Priya took the kids skiing in Colorado over New Year's, while telling me your stairs were too much for me to visit. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I could hear, faintly, one of the children, Miles I think, asking Priya something in the background, oblivious. It wasn't, Mom, it wasn't like you're making it sound, Nathan said finally, quieter now, some of the sharpness draining out of his voice and something else moving in behind it. Not quite guilt, not quite shame. Something more like the flat panic of a person who has just realized the story they've been telling themselves doesn't survive contact with the facts. We were going to pay it back. I always meant to pay it back. Maybe you did, I said. I believe you believe that. But you didn't, Nathan. And in the meantime I fell in my own kitchen and cracked 2 ribs. And you were at a team dinner. I asked to see my grandchildren, and there was always a reason it wasn't the right time. That's the part one can't get past. Not the money. The money I can survive without. It's that you made me feel like a burden for wanting to see my own son. Mom, I don't, that's not fair. I've also changed my will, I said, because I wasn't going to let him redirect the conversation the way he'd redirected every conversation over the last 3 years, toward his own discomfort instead of mine. Ren and Miles have an education trust now that neither you nor Priya can touch. There's a smaller sum for you than there used to be. And the rest is going to a scholarship in your father's name. You're punishing me. No, I said, and this was the truest thing I said in that entire conversation, the thing I turned over and over in my mind at 2 in the morning until I finally believed it myself. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel that way to you right now. He didn't have anything to say to that. I heard him breathe once, the kind of breath you take when you're trying to figure out whether to yell or cry and can't quite land on either. Then he said very quietly, I don't know what you want me to do. I want you to think about why it took closing a bank account for you to call me back within 4 days, I said. I've wanted a phone call like that for 3 years, Nathan. I just never thought it would take this to get one. We didn't resolve anything on that call. I don't think either of us expected to. He said he needed time to think. I told him that was fair, and that I loved him, which was true, and hung up before either of us could say anything that couldn't be walked back. Since then, I won't pretend this story has a neat bow on it. The kind you see at the end of the videos people post about moments like this. The triumphant music swelling over a reconciliation scene. Nathan and I have spoken twice since that call. Both times short, both times careful. Both of us picking our way across new, uncertain ground like people testing ice they're not sure will hold. He hasn't apologized outright, not in the full way I imagine I want him to, though he did say on the second call that he'd been thinking a lot, which from Nathan is not nothing. I haven't seen Ren or Miles in person since before my fall. I miss them so much some mornings it sits in my chest like a physical weight. But I've started sending them letters instead of texts. The kind that take a week to arrive and can't be answered with a thumbs-up emoji. Ren wrote back once in looping 10-year-old handwriting, asking when I'd come visit again. I cried reading it, but it felt more like hope than grief. I bought myself the kitchen renovation I'd put off for over a decade. Every month I get a small statement showing what's growing slowly and steadily, in the trust accounts for Ren and Miles, money no one can quietly siphon from a little at a time. I go to my church group on Wednesdays now. I've made 2 new friends there, both widows, both further along this road than I am, and it helps to hear that this particular kind of loneliness, the kind that comes not from having no family, but from having family who've simply stopped showing up, is more common than any of us like to admit. Sometimes protecting the people you love means protecting them from the people who are supposed to love them too, even when one of those people is your own child, even when doing it feels less like an act of self-respect and more, some days, like a small private grief you carry around without anyone noticing. If you've lived something like this, If you've ever had to choose between being generous and being safe, between being available and being used, I hope you know this much. Setting a boundary isn't the opposite of love. Some days it's the last honest thing love has left to offer, both to the person setting it and to the person, however imperfectly, still on the other side of it. I still keep Ray's earrings in the top drawer of my dresser, next to the new debit card that arrived exactly 1 week after I closed those accounts. Some mornings I put the earrings on for no particular reason at all, just to feel for a moment like the woman who walked into that bank and asked for exactly what was hers.